world our hearts know is possible, and sacred economics, the ascent of humanity, you know, climate, a new story, and like the list goes on. And I think also a really good, beautiful essay to get a reference, if you don't know his work already, is The Coronation, which he wrote sort of at the beginning of this quarantine time. So thank you so much, Charles, for joining us today. And I think my first question is really centered around your own relationship with nature, and being an avid reader of your work. It's really striking to me how you can sort of very succinctly and very eloquently bring forward these concepts. And I kind of assume that it must take some time in front of your computer. You talk a lot about the connection with nature, and I just wanted to ask you a little bit about your own personal journey and how you've been reconnecting with nature, or in what ways you feel like you've been sort of more moving with nature since you started this work, since you started asking these questions.
I do some gardening. I like to be barefoot. I like to do various embodied things involving not just my own body, but I wouldn't like present myself as somebody who's especially connected to nature or especially in tune with nature. The fact that I can speak the words that I speak, I think demonstrates that nature is a lot closer to all of us. If it were only somebody who is deeply, deeply immersed in nature, who is able to say the things that I'm saying, that would mean that it's kind of inaccessible. Like, and there are people who are saying beautiful things who are much closer to nature than I am, for sure. But I'm not actually, like you said something about me being your hero or something, like I'm not actually a very remarkable person in any way, as far as any particular heroic thing I've ever done or big trauma I've recovered from or anything like that. No near-death experiences, no heroic recovery from cancer, no deep communication with nature spirits. I haven't been abducted, as far as I know, by aliens, and nor do I channel any extraterrestrial beings or discarnate entities. Like, yet I'm saying a lot of things that others who do have those experiences are saying, which basically means to me that the water table of consciousness is rising, and knowledge that was maybe once only accessible by deeply embedded in nature people or deeply spiritual people is now available to pretty ordinary people like me and like everybody. So I'm not sure if that really answers your question, but
yeah, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I do feel a call to reconnect and an understanding that reconnecting isn't just going for hikes, isn't just looking at nature, but it means being in a give and take relationship. So, gardening might be an example of that, or caring for a place. When I spend some time at my brother's farm every year, we just got back and we're going to go again. And like there were some erosion gullies starting, so just taking some clay and putting a hump there, and fixing that, like that little act of care, which is guided by observing. It's very mundane. And I think that this mundanity is something that is calling many people. The evolution of consciousness right now is it's not just about, or maybe not primarily about, elevating our consciousness. It's also about lowering our consciousness. It's about becoming more intimate with materiality, not escaping into a spiritual realm. And it also includes bringing in the things that we've called spiritual, expanding. It basically means just expanding our palette of relationships to include all of the ones that the modern normalcy, the modern self, the modern way of life has rejected. It's rejected both the quote spiritual, mysterious ones, and it's also rejected the nitty-gritty hands in the soil experiences. So now is the time where we're bringing them all back.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's curious as well when we're talking about like really what is nature, because if we are nature, then what we do ultimately is natural. It's kind of like the evolution of nature acting through us. And I'm curious there's something that Alan Watts said that I listened to some years ago that really struck me. He said, what's the difference between a beehive and a building? And the way that we create these things in our world that are, in many ways very damaging and in other ways very beautiful, but they're deemed artificial or they're deemed unnatural. And so I guess my question to you is like, is what we're doing a natural evolution of nature in the sense of kind of at the same time distancing ourselves further from it?
Most buildings that I see today don't have the same feeling as a beehive. Mm-hmm. They don't seem like they are part of life, but they seem kind of anti-life. They don't seem like an organic part of the environment. They seem like something that has been imposed onto the environment. Not all buildings are like that. Many older buildings, even ones in cities, had the kind of beauty and soul that natural objects have. So the potential for humans to be truly part of nature and contributing to life is there. Certainly indigenous people, many, if not most, did and do participate in nature rather than seeking to accept themselves from nature. And modern society hasn't really done that. If you want to find a building that really looks like an enhancement to the world, you have to pretty much look at buildings built before at least 1950. Very, very few modern buildings are like beautiful, that like they strike your heart as, wow, that's beautiful. But some do. I get that feeling from Grand Central Station in New York, to be in that building. Like whoever designed and constructed that building, for one thing, they did it better than they needed to for any practical purpose. And secondly, they were tapped into some kind of information that allowed them to create something with presence, that has a quality of life to it, and that is beautiful in a way that I can't even really explain. So whatever they were tapping into, that is something I would like to see us recover and imbue into our built environment moving forward. So anyway, the potential is there, and the models are there for what it would look like for humans, for everything we do to be an offering to life. That's maybe a better definition of natural. Because like you said, like, okay, we're animals, we're natural. So everything we do is natural, right? But is everything we do an offering to life? In an ecosystem, everything is an offering to life. The poop of one being is the food for another being. The sugars that mycelial networks put out that feed bacteria then are a gift to the bacteria, and the bacteria then make a gift to the soil of nitrogen, and everybody is in this giant gift circle. Everybody has a contribution to make toward the thriving and the well-being of all. That's what life is. That's what life does. Life creates more life. So for us to actually be natural more than just in theory, we simply have to embrace that principle to understand ourselves, our role as being in service to the unfolding of life and beauty in the universe, so that everything that we do is actually a gift, is an offering, is a sacrament. And I think a lot of people, you know, we have, even in our individual lives, we have opportunities to do that. I've been exploring this idea a lot. Like, what is it to live ceremonially? It doesn't mean to imitate indigenous ceremonies, but it can be informed by the principles underneath those ceremonies. What do they have in common? They're all done with a recognition of the presence of holy beings. They're all done from a spirit of gratitude. They're all done in the knowledge of our embedded relationships, our relationality with the rest of the world. Like, anything that brings in that understanding will become ceremonial or will become prayerful. Anyway, that's some words.
Yeah. I think a lot about this because working with Indigenous elders, you know, so much of their living science is kind of based on this idea of offering. And, you know, I don't know the answer of, like, is the three cocas, the three leaves of coca, you know, is that offering as essential as knowing which tree is ready to get cut down so that the whole forest can thrive? You know, like, how do we know where the offerings and the ceremonies, like, how you know, it's tried and tested science. And so it's curious to just ponder the question on how we become that experiment again.
I mean, you know, it doesn't have to be about coca leaves. You know, anything that we do with that intention to contribute to the unfolding beauty and livingness of the world, that is in the same spirit as anything that an Indigenous person is doing.
Yeah.
That's the lesson, in my view.
There's also a question a lot of times that we don't really know how to make these offerings because we don't really have that kind of relationship with nature and the elements and our gardens and our lives like that. And it's curious. Another thing that I've just been really kind of dying to ask you is around the age of information that we're kind of at the dawn of right now, and in terms of, like, the information that we're receiving. It made me think about at the beginning, you know, or long ago, power was kind of equitable to the amount of land that you had. And then after the Industrial Revolution, power became kind of the amount of machines that you had, the amount of machinistic power that you could yield. And then and now we're in a place where really power is information. It's like this whole thing of data mining and even, like, just now what we're doing, like, we're constantly exchanging information in such a kind of hyperactive way. And yet the quality of this information is digital, right? It's based on zeros and ones. And I guess my question is to you, how much do you think that affects our ability to bring in and to hear and to feel and receive other kinds of information, the kind of information that you would need to, like, you know, fix the erosion on the side of a thing with your brother, you know?
Yeah, I think that we are learning in the time of COVID that not all information can be reduced to zeros and ones, that not all information can be quantified and digitized and reduced and controlled. Like, here we are having a conversation over Zoom. And yeah, you know, I'm getting some sense of your being. Unfortunately, if I look at you on the screen, then I'm not looking at the camera. So eye contact is a little bit different already. But then there are all of the things that cannot be translated into a data stream that if you were standing in front of me, I would be sensing. A lot of these things are not actually recognized by the holders of consensus reality, such as the effect of your, I don't know, if you're the electric the magnetic fields that your heart generates. That's considered inconsequential, but in my experience, there's something very different about physical presence than presence over Zoom. So that would be an example of a kind of information that is not reducible to data. And it's the same kind of information that you get through your bare feet when you're standing on some land. So basically the age of information really maybe should be called the age of data. It gives us a lot of a certain kind of information and a lot of a certain kind of experience, to the increasing exclusion of other kinds of information that cannot be digitized. And that we pay more and more attention to the images on screens and the sounds coming from speakers, and less attention to the things that cannot be translated into those mediums. So we become eventually insensitive to whole realms of information and all of these other senses that are not well recognized by science. And we think that we see the whole world. Sitting on the internet, getting all of this information, we think we see the whole world because that's where the information is. But it's actually a very cramped ghetto of reality. There's so much more that we can communicate and experience and learn than can possibly be put onto a screen. So it's not to say that we should prohibit, abandon this kind of technology that we're using right now. But maybe its role shouldn't be as big as it is today. Maybe it's good to go on a technology fast sometimes. I advocate going on a news fast from time to time. It's simply so that you can open up to other information sources, because the news is pretty loud and lurid, and it dulls our sensitivity. It's designed to bring up one emotional response after another, and we get used to these intense stimuli and lose the finer sensations that allow us to communicate with the beings of nature, that maybe would allow us to communicate with each other without telecommunications, without electronic communication. Maybe we could do that if we could quiet down enough. And it's like if you're in a really loud place and you go outside, there's still a ringing in your ears and you can't hear a whisper even after you've left that environment. That's kind of the conditioning of our psyche to a high intensity stimulus. We can recover lost abilities when we withdraw from the usual noise and of the media environment.
Yeah, for sure. And it's so much to do with the story as well, the running narrative, like the loudest voice, and the running narrative of fear and all of these things, without necessarily leaving room for grief, which is something that you've talked about a lot. And I think I want to jump into that emotion and ask you about the importance of grief for our nature, for our communities of plants and animals, and what role that has to play in the kind of reparations and the regeneration that's needed right now.
Yeah. So one way I understand grief, it's the process of integrating the truth of loss. Francis Weller puts it so beautifully. He says, everything you love, you will lose. There will be some day where every every loved one you have, you will say goodbye to them. Either they're going to die or you're going to die, or there'll be some other kind of goodbye. Everything precious to you, even your own body, your own heart, everything you love, you will lose. We intellectually can understand that. But if we have not experienced grief, we don't really get that information on a body level. And we go through life as if we were not going to lose everything we love, as if the things that we love are permanent, as if we were never going to die. So grief integrates and makes real, it brings into the body that information. That's a kind of information. When we bring that in, then we know how precious those things are. Without grief, there's no real understanding of how precious things are. This is, even like with my wife, sometimes I'll imagine, fast forward 30, 40, however many years, and we're saying our last goodbye. And I can, pre-experience some of that grief. And then I can see her as so much more precious. So, the environmental discourse today is very much about fear. Here are the bad things that are going to happen to us if we don't reduce carbon emissions and if we don't preserve the Amazon, et cetera, et cetera. But none of that data, none of that information, none of that fear mongering is actually going to make a very big change if it doesn't sink into a deeper level. If we can, so if you go to the Amazon and you have a deep experience there, and then you go to a clear cut or a beautiful place of your childhood is bulldozed down and paved over, that brings home the preciousness of life on Earth in a way, because, people don't really believe the fear narratives, actually. People believe that things are going to be fine, that they're going to keep going the way that they've always been going, that we'll find some technological solution. And we could cut down the Amazon and, we'll make bubble cities. We'll do hydroponics. We'll do synthetic food, what if those fantasies are not fantasies? What if we really could do that? What if threat to our survival cannot force us into being loving participants in the unfolding of life and beauty on Earth? What if we actually have to choose that? So that's part of why grief is so important. It's part of the integration process of what is actually precious. And its counterpart, joy, equally important, so that we understand how good it can be. The energy of celebration, the energy of appreciation, the experience of beauty, the experience of love, that pulls us toward the world, the more beautiful world that our hearts know is possible. So that's part of both of those emotions, are part of the integration of a full information set. Without that kind of information intake through the body, through the emotions, we're left with just what we can get on the internet, just what we can get on screen. And we're hearing all kinds of opposite things, all kinds of conflicting narratives. Everybody has their own little reality bubble. I mean, well, not everybody, but there's, many competing reality bubbles, and whichever one you go in, that seems like that one's true. And how could the people in the other reality bubble be such idiots? This narrative warfare that's going on. It's so bewildering that, in a way, maybe that's a good thing, because it's like we throw up our hands. We're like, okay, I don't know what's true. Are masks good or masks bad? Is there asymptomatic transmission? Was the lockdown a mistake? I mean, not that I don't have my opinions on these things, but ultimately, I could find the evidence to support any position I want to hold. So if I want certainty, clarity, I have to access a kind of information that I cannot get on the internet.
Yeah, and there's an emotional quality to that information, and there's an intuitive one as well, and then that comes sort of hand in hand, as you said, with joy and with this element of care. And there's something, I've been doing lots of fundraisers for the Amazon and taking part in all of these online events and things like that. And, one of the things that we struggle the most with is how do we get people to care for something that seems so far away?
It's so
And
tempting, isn't it, to try to scare them into caring? Oh my
exactly.
God, they're cutting down like X, hectares per second. And then, like, yeah, how
Yeah.
do we
And
make people care?
how do we make people care? And there was this one amazing Mapuche guy that was in the south of Chile. This is my ancestry, and I was just down there, was talking to a forest ranger that's of that lineage as well, and he was saying you can't care about what you don't know about, and you got to find out about it. And so I wanted to ask you, like, in the kind of journeys of exploration that you've been in, writing these books and asking these questions and speaking to all of these very, very big ideas, that you clearly come to with a big element of care for the ideas and also for your fellow man and all of nature. It's like how does somebody that doesn't have that natural spark of curiosity to find out more, how do we shift into a place of greater care, greater capacity for caring?
Everybody has that spark of curiosity. So we need to learn to speak to that within others that already cares. What prevents us from speaking to that part? Well, in order to speak to it, you have to actually see it. You can't just pretend or hold an ideology that they have some part in there that cares. Yes, they are a child of God. Yeah, like you have to actually see it. And to see it, you have to look for it. And to look for it, you have to know that it exists. So one of the strategies that I've taken up, one of the passions that I have, is to tell a story of the world in which that care does exist in every human being, because we're actually fed a story that says the opposite. The story of economics that says that people are motivated to maximize their rational self-interest. The story of evolutionary biology that science has told us that beings are driven by their genes to maximize reproductive self-interest. That's who you are, not a caring, loving contributor, gift bearer to the world. So, and then that suspicion that we're nothing but selfish gets turned inward too. And we hardly dare to know ourselves as fundamentally here to bring gifts to the world. And these gifts could be very tangible, but they could just be, I was reading a book by Arkan Loshwala, and he quoted he had a dream vision where a man who came to him and said, the main purpose of humanity is to contemplate the wonders of the universe. So even that contemplation of the beauty and magnificence and miracle of this world, this is actually the true purpose of science. It's to open up new vistas of wonder for us. And that attention is food for the earth. So even that is a contribution. So anyway, so to bring people into that realization, it's kind of an infection, when we see that truly in ourselves, then we're able to see it in others and able to invite them into inhabiting that true dimension of their being. So really, it's just like all this how do we do it? The answer, there's a million answers to that. It depends. It's unique to each situation. So where do you get the creativity to know exactly what to say or what not to say, or what experience to give to a person when maybe you can awaken that in them, maybe you can call them to that. That creativity comes from looking for it, seeing it, speaking to it. And, maybe you say something direct, maybe you just give them a pat on the back, maybe you compliment their tie, whatever it is, maybe it's a joke. But there's the creativity, and then that miracle path that it doesn't look like you've set out to persuade them of anything, but you're holding the invitation. You're holding the intention to host them in that reality, in the reality of, we are here to give to the beauty and life of this world. I know that so strongly that even if you don't know that right now, I can know it for you. Where do you get that strength to be able to hold that knowledge? You don't get it from yourself. Even that strength comes as a gift, which we can hold for each other, which I'm doing right now. And in half an hour, I might be in the pit of despair, and maybe somebody will hold that for me. And this is how we uplift each other and hold each other in a new and ancient story of what a human being is for.
Mm. Yeah, and that new and ancient story, that's something that's been really fascinating to me recently, particularly since I started my work with the Indigenous and kind of coming into contact with all these really, really, really ancient traditions that have all of this wisdom embedded in it. And there's this sentence that I kind of feel like uncomfortable with, and that sentence is back to nature. And there is an aspect of it that's a return, right? That's a kind of a homecoming that's great. But there's also this element, this implication of somehow going back in time, somehow becoming more primitive, to go back to nature in that way. And so I guess my question is, how do we move forwards and backwards at the same time? How do we?
Yeah, so the truth in the cliche of back to nature is it's the recovery of lost relationships. The modern person has a very narrow, truncated set of relationships. Most of the relationships are mediated by markets and by technology. Not a lot of direct relationships to a community. Most people don't know their neighbors very well. Even when I was a kid, we pretty much knew the story of at least a third of our neighbors. Go back another generation or two more generations. I mean, in some places, if in traditional villages, it's still like this. You know every single person's story in the whole village and who their grandparents were, and the time that their uncle fell in love with, you have a full complement of stories that bind you in relationship to the people and to all the other beings around you, to all the plants, to all the animals, to the forces of nature, et cetera, et cetera. So that constellation of relationships bestows on humans a strong identity, a strong sense of belonging, of feeling at home in the world. That is what back to nature actually is seeking. It's seeking to restore the relationships to place, which it's more than just back to nature. It's also back to community. It's back to relationality. But yeah, it's very much, many of these truncated and broken relationships are with the beings of nature, that we call the beings of nature: plants, animals, streams, mountains, the rain. That's what back to nature is. And even in the realm of technology, it's to, well, I said it before, it's to bring technology into the circle of the gift and to make it natural, or to dissolve the pretense that it is not natural.
Yeah, there's an aspect of your book, the ascent of, is it the ascent of man? Am I saying it right?
The ascent of humanity.
The ascent of humanity. Thank you.
Yeah.
There's an aspect of that I really I'm very curious about, and how it manifested actually in my own life. And this aspect is, this dirty is bad, clean is good, being close to the earth is for poor people, and being away and like high up in your palace is good. Oh my gosh, my hand disappeared. How do you think that's manifesting right now? And do you see in your experiences since the quarantine started, and the work that you've been engaging since, do you see like a shift in that narrative?
This goes back thousands of years to the beginnings of social class that happened in the division of labor in the first mass agricultural societies, where you had hierarchies. The highest, most powerful person was the king and the priests, and the lowest were the farmers, those who had their hands in the soil. So progress, advancement became a matter of moving away from the soil. Even to this day, the highest prestige in society is with those, and the highest power and the highest wealth is with those who have the least to do with materiality, generally speaking. Academics, in the world of the mind, this is like a higher realm. Hedge fund managers, they're operating in this realm of total abstraction, and they tend to get a lot wealthier than farmers, plumbers, laborers, right? These people are directly involved in materiality. So that's one level. There's like a social class level where advancement means to be like the king's feet were not even allowed to touch the ground, right? But it's also on a collective level where progress means moving away from the ground. Like ultimately it was to move into space and not need nature at all. It's the transcendence of nature. And so, and it's the opposite of the craving that I was talking about, the back to nature, to restore lost relationships. What progress has been is to disband those relationships, to become less and less dependent on other beings and more in control. Progress has meant progress in technologies of control. One aspect of that is cleanliness next to godliness. Why is cleanliness a good thing? It's a kind of a separation from the world, literally from the dirt. So one thing that we're seeing in the COVID phenomenon is, in very practical terms, like your well-being depends on being as separate as possible. It's like the opposite of the direction that we really should be going. As separate as possible from other people, as separate as possible from the microbial world, from the dirt. You wash hands all the time, you wipe everything down, like you maintain this aseptic cleanliness with the idea that you will be healthier that way. You might have, like if you do that, you might have a smaller chance of getting infected by a microbe, but will you actually be healthier in the long run when you don't constantly replenish your microbiome through the genetic information, the flow of life through your body? I mean, is the self separate, and can it thrive separate from the world? Is that really where progress takes us? Is that the pinnacle of human development, where finally we've transcended the hug, the party, the wedding, the dirt, and we all live in a bubble? Like, is that really where we want to go? To me, that I don't know, it kind of freaks me out. And I think that another future is offering itself to us, where we really embrace life more and embrace death more too, and no longer hold death prevention as the highest value, but ask really, how are we meant to live? The technologies of control and the ideology of control, it doesn't recognize what grief tells us. It's part of the denial of death. It's the pretense that we could live forever if only we could control enough. And we have technologists, sometimes predicting that. We'll decode the molecular mechanisms of aging, or have robot parts, cybernetics and so forth, like, and someday become immortal. Like, that is the ultimate expression of the story of separation. And that is a myth that could carry us in a certain direction. But there are other stories that we can tell ourselves about what is important in life and how to be human that might lead us toward more participation in the give and take of life, where we understand health as a matter of relationships, where we look to we ask, why are people so susceptible to this disease? And maybe we, start restoring some of these relationships. Like these are the things that are getting left out by the dominant, by the official narratives of COVID-19. Like, you don't see the WHO or the CDC saying, okay, everybody take these supplements, take these herbs, do yoga, do all these things that can boost your immunity. It's like 40 years of alternative medicine just doesn't even exist. And everyone's doubled down on the most narrowly orthodox therapies. So maybe this extreme of separation is an offering to us to choose something different. And yeah, maybe the death rate will go up a little bit. And we have to ask, as a society, is it worth, if we can save 10,000 or 50,000 or 100,000 lives, is it worth permanent lockdown? In fact, it's not actually saving that many lives. The number of people who are now starving to death on this earth, is facing like imminent starvation. The UN World Food Program estimates that 265 million people will face starvation this year, which is, hundreds of times more than have died from COVID-19. So anyway, that's a whole rabbit hole that we don't need to go down right now, but the basic thing is life does not thrive in isolation. We do not thrive in isolation, not in terms of health, not in terms of sanity, not in terms of joy. We are meant to be in relationship.
Yeah, and when you talk about separation like that, I also feel you somehow talking about the separation from our own history and from our own ancestry and from all of those traditions of, herbal medicine that you're talking about that somehow get canceled because, the present, the current, and the latest iteration of the technology and the medications that we can take and all of that kind of are so prevalent and they're so dominant that there's this separation in time from the places that we've come from and the wisdom that we've come from. And then, you mentioned the cycles of life and death and our reconciliation with those two elements. And I think that brings me to a big question, which I have in terms of the movements of nature, and that's the movement of time and the importance of time and the cycles of time. And I guess my question to you is really, anything that has sparked your curiosity, whether it's the constraints of the Gregorian calendar or this element of life and death and the kind of movement of time and the natural movement of time. Any insights that you can give us, or any questions or curiosities that you've encountered in that theme?
The calendar and the clock and the finer and finer division of time are necessary to run an industrial society. If you want to run an airport or a factory or a computer, everything has to be coordinated very carefully. So to the extent that we participate in industrial society, we have to surrender some of our sovereignty to the clock. In the long run, we may liberate ourselves from this. And even right now, there is, as as we deindustrialize ourselves, we can take steps of liberation away from linear clock time. But it's a big shift, a big undertaking. And maybe we will visit the world of time less frequently. Maybe that's already happening for some people. We're deindustrializing in a lot of ways. Like our educational system is also an industrial model. And it is, again, with COVID-19, taken to an extreme where even the social element of schooling is abolished as everyone sits in front of their computer. But on the other side of that, once something reaches its extreme, then it gives birth to its opposite. I mean, we scheduled our time for 6:50 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Like, if I have collected some stories of people who are, my one friend, Bayo Akomolafe, tells this story about going to meet a Yoruba shaman. And, they made an appointment for like 10 a.m. or something. And the shaman shows up at 3 p.m. And Bayo's been sitting there like waiting, pacing, waiting for hours and hours and hours. I hope I'm getting the story right. It's close to this. And finally the guy shows up and he's like, really, like, what happened? Are you okay? What's going on here? He's kind of upset, and the shaman's like, what's the big deal? Like, he just didn't have this concept of late. Late was not a concept. So in order to operate in, actually, really, you could look at it through the lens of ritual. Clocks are ritual implements.
Yeah.
That we're using to coordinate our activities. And each system of ritual allows certain kinds of magical results. So the kind of magic that we call technology, which is the outgrowth of the industrial age, is made possible by this sacred thing that underlies all other technology called the clock. The clock is the most fundamental invention of the Industrial Revolution, way more fundamental than the steam engine or anything else. It is the keystone. It makes all the rest of it, it holds the whole thing together. So if we look at it that way, as the key ritual tool in an entire elaborate system, the most elaborate system of ritual ever invented, then we can understand its power and its limitations. And any system of ritual underneath it has a mythology, has a world story that says this is what is, that reifies time in this case. And I think that so it's not about abandoning the clock and the calendar, but it is about recognizing their uses and their limitations. We can achieve certain miracles with reductionistic control-based technology. And there are other things that we are utterly helpless to achieve through that system of technology. We are, as a civilization, reaching limitations. And in our perplexity and helplessness, we are finally looking beyond our own systems of myth and ritual, back to the indigenous, back to the wisdom traditions, back to the other cultures, and saying, maybe you can do some things that we can't. Maybe you know some things that we don't. Let's broaden the scope of our curiosity, not as like this patronizing, oh, let's learn about other cultures, let's respect other cultures, but because, help, you know something that we don't know, let us learn.
Yeah. There's a word that we coined over here at the home. I don't know how original it is, but it's this aspect of re-indigenizing ourselves, and really taking these kind of concepts and kind of observing and learning what we can, and then how do we implement them into our own lives. And one of the things that we've been doing over here is just paying a lot more attention to the moon, and paying a lot more attention to, like, solstice and the equinoxes, and just as you said before, like practicing that sense of observation and seeing what is actually there. Why are these times important? And one of the things that this harmonic convergence is centered around is this really magnanimous planetary alignment, which I know very, very little about, but which will be explained by other people, thankfully, in throughout the course of the event. And it's very much that, and also the Mayan calendar, which had a of an end and the beginning of a cycle just recently as well. And all of these kind of things that we're seeing outside, it very much feels a lot like the time is now. There's this sense of urgency and near on panic to really make all of the shifts that we want to make. And it's like 2030 is this somehow this magic number as well. So I wanted to ask you, how are you dancing between action and acceptance, and what useful tips can you give our viewers out there, but between those two things, the urgency of this time, but also the observation and the kind of quieting of the mind that's not in action, to really come from a place of greater wisdom?
The first thing that comes to me is please don't confuse urgency with hurry.
Yeah.
Or do not channel the energy of urgency into hurry. Urgency comes from a misalignment of some sort, either from the misalignment between who I'm being right now and what's true in the world, who I'm being right now and who I'm supposed to be, what I am doing and what the world needs. Like, that misalignment creates a tension. It creates a discomfort that we call urgency. It's that feeling, I've got to do something. I've got to change something. I can't just sit here. I can't just stay the same, right? That's what urgency is. When it gets translated into hurry, though, we tend to default to familiar patterns of action and familiar ways of seeing things, and do the things that we're already good at, and see things in the way that we've always seen them, and just try to do more and faster of what we've already been doing. Very likely, if there is this misalignment, it is probably caused by the things we've been doing and the way we've been doing them. So this is another saying that Bayo, who I mentioned before, likes to quote, an African proverb. He says, "The times are urgent, let's slow down." Because only by taking a pause, by questioning what we thought we knew and how we were doing things, is it possible for any new knowledge to come in. We have to unlearn before we can learn, because we are, and this is very true of my culture, that we're so trapped in, it's like a lens, a discriminating lens has been glued to our eyeballs, and we are unable to see in any other way. Even if that lens is removed, the habits of seeing, the way that we categorize the world, our understanding of causality, how all of these things, they feed into patterns of action, patterns of response that no longer serve us. So as far as this urgency, maybe it's just even a breath. But that's just, I understand maybe our time is getting to an end, but maybe I'll just offer that as food for thought. To deprogram from our habits.
Yeah, really take it all in a whole new way. It's like the constant question constant question right now, right? It's like, who are you and who are you now and who are you now and who are you now? Thank you so much, Charles. It's been such a treat to pick your brain a little bit, and thank you so much for joining in this conversation to kind of inspire this shift in a good way, in a way that can last, and all the many shifts that we have to make, and in all the many ways that are true to each individual soul. I wanted to ask if you would like to offer any other ways of people being familiar with your work, or like where people can contact you, or where people, like any events that you're doing or anything like that you might like to offer up so that people can follow up with you if they feel inspired to.
Well, I don't know. I haven't really been doing events.
You are now.
I mean, I guess, yeah. Events. I haven't been publicizing them or really, I have a website, charleseisenstein.org. People can find me there.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, and I really wish you well, and let's continue. We're together in many ways. So thank you so
really
much for
our conversation.
Yeah, likewise.
I did most of the talking, but anyway.
It's all good, man. I could go on listening to you for another few days. So wish you all the best, and hopefully cross paths with you soon, man.
Yeah,
thank you.
Okay. Bye.
All right.
The Boldly Now Show. Burning desire. Big ideas. Bold action.
Hi, and welcome to the Boldly Now Show. I'm Michael Sean Conaway.
And I'm Rachel Morrison. And today we're going to be discussing planetary intelligence.
Planetary intelligence in terms of a thriving future for humanity. Standing out, looking back, we have a much better chance of having real intelligence. Intelligence that takes into account more than just our current circumstances. And as we know right now, the current circumstances in the world lead us to believe that everything's broken and our future is likely to be not so great. We at Boldly Now actually have a difference in opinion with that. We believe that together, collectively, as in collective intelligence, we can generate a thriving future for humanity. The first thing to think about in regards to that, and the things that we want you guys to take into this conversation, is really how we experience the world today is framed and shaped by our view of what everything means, or the causality of meaning. So in what context are we looking at today's circumstances? And that's a really great place to start. So for me, I look at if I'm looking out in the world and I'm seeing things that are broken, I'm seeing the pandemic, systemic racism, obviously big problems with political division and divisiveness of all kinds, I might be tempted to look out into the future and say, wow, if we don't handle these really near-term problems, things are probably going to get worse. And in fact, there's lots of people that will tell us all the things that are going wrong. And if you look at news media today, you're probably overwhelmed by the number of things that are going wrong. Given that we live inside of the context of our lives, or the story of our lives, what might be a different way to look at the world that might give us a little bit more power and agency in that? I'll throw that one to you, Rachel.
Well, there's lots of things that we can look at in the world. And for starters, I think it's how we perceive the world as something separate than ourselves. Now is the time where we get to actually transcend our current view of the world and realize that as a collective, for the first time possibly in the history of time, since we have the, as Aguirre's would say, the noosphere aware of itself, here we are all having the same conversation together, that we have the ability to understand fully for the first time at the same time that we are not separate from the world that we are shifting into. The world itself is not separate from us. We are not separate from it, nor are we separate from each other or anything that exists in it. And from that place, we can open up into a space of universal intelligence that allows us to create and become exponentially exceptional together.
Right, and I like what you said about together. I was on a call today, and somebody said, "Yeah, we've hit peak individuation." It's like, oh, we have striven so long to define ourselves individually as separate from other, different from other, and in most cases more special than other, in one way or another, or our group is more special or has access to more information or the right view, and we really have hit a point where, when we talk about divisiveness, who is being divisive? Well, we're being divisive. We are separating ourselves from others, and the Thich Nhat Hanh quote, I transform the garbage in myself so that you live in a beautiful world, really comes to mind. So anytime we see something out in the world, we have to look around and think, wow, what is it that I am manifesting in this moment? And how is it that I'm rejecting something that I don't like or don't believe in? Now that, this is all common ground. You guys have been through this. You have a deep understanding of this, I think, in many ways. But the kind of special aspect that I'd like to bring to this is when we begin to think beyond our lifetimes, and we begin to think of the human beings and the other species on the planet and the planet itself. What are we leaving behind in time? It gives us a little bit of access to thinking about and being for something beyond ourselves and beyond our lifetime, and that gives us that sense of like, oh, we can consider it all as one thing. I don't actually have to deal with whatever my common day-to-day stresses are. I don't have to deal with what's going to happen next fall. Our school's going to open. Am I going to be able to have my business be successful? And I'm able to start to go, okay, so all that got handled some way or another, and my life turned out as it turned out, and my time came to an end. What is left behind? And I think our indigenous elders often talk about, the impact of generations, but it's not a practice we do very much. We can think about our kids sometimes, and maybe our grandkids, especially if we have them at this point, but we don't tend to think of our descendants as something that is here now, that is something that we actually are together as one through time, and therefore we don't have much access to A, what kinds of responsibilities come with that, and B, what kind of freedom we can get from the conditions and constraints of our own life, free to dream of what might constitute thriving, what might constitute health for the planet or health for other species. Instead, we try to dream inside of the container we're in. Well, like I would be for thriving of a certain ecosystem if I didn't have to suffer because of it. Or I would be for the thriving of this species or that species, but actually that impacts my world. And so we get constrained by thinking, oh, if the world's going to thrive, I'm not going to thrive. If we can get out beyond that, then we can actually get beyond the constraint. Look, we don't want to imagine and design a future in a world for our own limitations. We want to design beyond the limitations. We want to dream into our best expression. And I don't mean our best expression, those of you who are listening to this show, but I do mean all beings, 100% of life.
Absolutely. And from that perspective, I want to bring in something that is very boldly now. And you mentioned prophecy, indigenous prophecy. And I don't know if you've heard or not, but this past week, the North Dakota pipeline was ordered to be shut down. And for many of us in the Unify family, that was a very important time of remembering and bringing things into focus. Most importantly, because we're talking about the boldly now and the aspect of prophecy and the ancient wisdom that we're bringing forward into the world, there was two prophecies of that time that I believe that we're living out today, that of the black snake and that of the 7 generations. And from that perspective, there was something really interesting that was said, that if the water turned black in that particular area, then the world would become sick. That's the first piece. The second piece is that the 7 generations were going to come together of many colors and take full responsibility of the world that they were going to create moving forward. That's the synopsis of that time. And so there's a unique opportunity that we have here to live into the prophecies that actually create a generative future as opposed to a predictive future that many of us assume is going to happen. A friend of mine sent me an article just the other day saying something along the lines that by a certain amount of time in the very near future, we'd be lucky to have jellyfish here. And I'm not one to subscribe to a reality where that's being created, because we here in this collective that I think we're all tuning into and building the substance to create the universal communication technology of biospheric consciousness and biospheric awareness. And biospheric awareness was a term that was originally coined by the economist Jeremy Rifkin in understanding how to revalue systems for the planet. And the evolution of that is to understand that we, as a species who has the ability to differentiate, right, that's how we experience the extreme levels of isolation and indifference that we have in the world today, have the ability to speak to the unifying principles just as much as we have to speak to the principles that divide us. And so to understand how to use biospheric communication technology from the ancient future really means that we're choosing to embody all of the life on this planet that has and does not have a voice. So the trees, the water, the animals, the children, anything that is here now, and the shoulders of whom we stand on, and the future we choose to orient ourselves to, allowing our small self to step aside for a moment and let the wisdom and the will of all of that I just spoke to be the voice that animates this body in this moment, quite possibly the way that Mark Sims earlier was speaking about how his experience of communication can come through. We all have an ability to do that in a very unique way. And imagine what could happen if we all did that together in one room, or in one UN floor, or in one congregation, and the list could go on and on. But I think very soon, in this moment and in the moments building up to the great meditation that we're going to have coming up later in the week, that we will have an ability to step into that and realize what could happen from the collective experience.
And I just want to point out something, and I'll make a very good example of this. You know, what Rachel's talking about is not woo-woo. It's not that we need to connect in some kind of etheric way. We actually need to connect, like speaking, like drawings, like looking at impacts of things. And I think the North Dakota Access Pipeline is a great example. Right now we as a North American collective of people have not dealt with our dependency on petroleum-based products. Now, we make an unchoiced choice. So we use a lot of plastic. Where does plastic come from? It comes to oil. So we buy things that are disposable, or even things that we don't need. And where does that come from? Where does that manufacturing process? Where does the energy come from? Well, it comes from oil. So we create an environment in which we need a lot of oil, not just for energy, but for creating the materials we're using. Now, do we do that consciously, or do we do that out of a desiring space, or a hungry ghost body? I think it's mostly out of that. I don't think we're really conscious about the way we use things. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't make computers. Yeah, computers are really handy. I'm sure this camera in front of us has parts made out of petroleum, all very, very good. But we shouldn't be using that lightly. It is if you will, a magical alchemical process to create these objects, and it should be done with some reverence and respect. And so then okay, so we have a lack of responsibility about oil, and then we have then a political system that really favors white culture, and I'll say it very plainly, white male culture, really, really clearly. And so why did the pipeline go through that area of North Dakota? Is because they had the people with the least amount of power were in the way. Now, does that make sense given the system we have? Yeah, it makes sense. Is it tragic? Yes, it's tragic. But the solution here is not just to say, okay, no pipeline, and no more power. Like, we're all going to just be chill on the land. No, actually, we have to take responsibility like grown-up adults. We have to have conversations. And what we would say at Boldly Now, we have to have conversations for a future, a collective future, where the indigenous people, the Lakota, from North Dakota and South Dakota, which is impacted by this, have a seat at the table. And their prophecies and their wisdom has a seat at the table. And the executives who are in the business of oil need to have a seat at the table. And so are the people who, like us, who might be consuming the products of that. And so a lot of this, can be very, very practical. We just don't do it. We tend to like to do this thing called they're good, we're good, they're bad, vilify the other person's point of view, and actually not make progress in understanding that we have to evolve these systems. What would a post-petroleum-based world look like tomorrow if we shut off all the petroleum? Well, it would probably mean that some really, really strange things would happen. We are not at all prepared for a post-world petroleum world. And in fact, we may not even want a completely post-petroleum world. I don't know where we lie on that. But what we have to do first, instead of have these divisive conversations, is decide, well, what do we want in our world? Like, how much do we want to be able to travel around? Or how much stuff do we want that's disposable? How much time and energy should we make towards things that are more lasting and permanent? Or how are we going to use the resources of the earth? Who gets access to the natural resources of the earth? Who gets to manage and care for that? How do we make collective decision making? These things take a lot of work. And we believe that the first place to start that work is to look at what would the results of doing that work be like? What would the world be like if we reinvented our fuel technologies? What would the world be like if we gave indigenous wisdom a seat at the table? If we gave people of color equal access to power and money and a say? What would it look like? How would that function? And until we can imagine that, it's really, really hard to start taking actions to having that happen.
What that reminds me of is the importance of building bridges as opposed to creating walls. And how when we're able to do that, we can transcend the experience of knowing that we are going to need an intelligent planetary system to get us to the next level. But most importantly, we're going to need a planetary system that reveres wisdom, where it's not solely relying on quantifications and different ways of identifying insufficiencies, because I feel like the future cannot be usurped. It must be benevolently co-created for us to all come together, and nor can the future come from revering or vilifying the past in any way. And realize that what's happened up until this point, no matter how drastic or how amazing you think the experience has been, needs to come into a neutral place of understanding so that we can actually experience the observation of what has happened to all step into reality together. And what I'm saying is that we have an opportunity to take all of our world view perspectives and have this like a quantum smushing of all of our world perspectives. I'm not going to get too technical on it, but it's true, like, because we can be in the same place right here, right now, and be in two separate worlds.
That's right.
Completely. But how amazing could it be if our worlds began to collide and created a true vortex for us to create a real reality together, where it was more seamless than rigid and jagged.
Right. Well, and that starts right here at me, right? If I see the world in very fixed ways, this is this and that is that, and Rachel's over there and I'm over here, and I own a car and my car is blue, and like all these small little things that build up to this rigid point of view in the world. And hey, I have the things I have because I worked hard, or whatever my story is about, or I don't have anything because I was never given a chance, or whatever that story is. It's our attachment to those things that makes it hard for our worlds to and merge is not the right word, but to kind of infiltrate each other, so that I actually get a sense or a feeling of your world. And I'm going to make a point here. Trauma has to be healed. So if you have trauma, and that goes for individual trauma, collective trauma, cultural trauma. Obviously, our indigenous peoples in the country of the United States have, some traumas from the perpetration of the past. Obviously, our Black brothers and sisters have trauma, and they have injustice. In both cases, it needs to be righted. So there's work to be done to get to the point where we actually have the capacity to let loose, and trauma work is really important. And we're not saying it's not. But what we are saying is there's something beyond trauma work. There's something beyond restoration. There's something even beyond regeneration. A lot of our friends are deep in the work of regeneration for the planet. We believe that the step beyond that is generation, imagining something new, imagining a new world for all of us. And we're going to get on to the second half of our topic here in a second. But so planetary is important. That there is a planetary capacity to communicate, to share worlds, to be inside of each other's worlds. And then at Boldly Now, we'd also say there's some really necessary ingredients for our future that we really have to get clear on. One is that humanity needs to be a net positive to the planet. We have to be able to stand for clean air, clean water, increasing biodiversity, not decreasing biodiversity on the planet, increasing richness of our topsoil. If we can get those things right as metrics, the rest of the future we invent is actually going to work out pretty well for the planet, at least. And then the second thing we really think is on a planetary level is that we really have to take care of some basic human rights for human beings. And I don't just mean rights like my liberty type rights, freedom, no slavery, things like that. I actually mean that I actually have right to a safe place to live in, to clean water to drink, to good and nourishing foods, foods brought from the land that actually nourish my body instead of taking things from it. And I have to be given the right to give my gifts on this planet, to actually do what makes me come alive, to make my contribution. So we kind of have these two worlds that we really feel are fundamental to a future. One has to do with the planet and humanity being a net positive, and the other has to do with humanity and how we can provide this safe space for human beings to be humans. And then anything else outside of that, we really feel needs to be dealt with on a very local level. In fact, a hyper-local level. So we have planetary and we have hyper-local. Let's talk about hyper-local for a minute.
Absolutely. Yeah. So for me, I think one of the most important pieces of hyper-local in regards to this world smush, as we call it, in this amazing scientifically new term that we've just created, is that you actually identify this smushing from the aspect of looking at it with a semi-permeable membrane, meaning that things can easily be interchangeable and interoperable within that system. So they're not stacked on top of each other in a solidified way, but they become more gel-like with each other, so that the best of humanity, the best of our intelligence, and the best of our wisdom can actually share freely within that communication and in that conversation and in that dialogue that I think we're going to have to take very earnestly from this point into the next definite 10 years, and even so on and so forth beyond that, because we're really going to need to have our ability to hear each other from a hyper local space and know truly what a person needs in each watershed region or bioregion, and not assume what we think people in the Amazon need if we've never been there and had any communication with anyone there. I remember a story from when I was visiting over there that one of the locals was telling me about how somebody came in and purchased homes. They thought that they needed homes for the place, and so they made basically tin homes for a lot of the indigenous people to live in. But what they didn't know is that the materials that they were using to make the homes that they already had was the thing that they needed given the heat and humidity, and every one of those homes essentially became trash because they became ovens. And so without understanding the place that you're actually in, you can't assume you know what a group of people need without a moment of connection. And then an intelligent way to reverse engineer and redistribute that information into a practical, meaningful way.
And our friends over at the Hunger Project have been doing a lot of community development based upon coming in and not bringing, they don't bring a project to a community. They, first of all, they bring a conversation to the women. They enroll the women in a conversation of, well, what's important to your village or what's important to your local area? And if you guys were to come together to dream up something new, what would that be? And so just notice the power of inquiry. So there's kind of a mindset that has kind of fueled colonialism from the very beginning of time, which is a knower mindset. I know what indigenous people in southeastern New Mexico need. I know what the indigenous people in California need. So I'm, as the patriarch, I'm going to come in and give that to them. Wow, what a huge mistake that was, right? And if you look at kind of thousands of years of that a belief that I know better than, and how much damage that's caused, versus if you step into the world of inquiry always ends with a question mark. It's a learner mentality. It's I don't know, but I'm here to help, to be a gift, to be a stand for whatever you need. I'm here to be of service. And ultimately that inquiry may turn out to be, we don't need you. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for your time. And it's a super valid thing for maybe a community to come to their own sovereignty and say, yeah, that's great. Thank you so much for your help, but we don't need your help. So I think one of the things as we start looking to a future, we're not talking about creating a colonial future. We don't want a future. In fact, the parent body of Boldly Now is called the Generative Futures Initiative. Not future, but futures, because there are many different futures, and many of those futures are hyperlocal. And we believe that in 100,000 years, there could be even more diversity of culture and tradition than we have certainly now. And maybe in a way, a restoration of local culture and tradition. The drive, especially from the colonialization of the Americas, was to drive towards a Christianization, a Western Christianization of the world, and a single worldview. So we have monotheism, but we also have monoculturalism that did a lot of that oppression. So what is the opposite of that? Well, we think hyperlocalization has a big part to do in that. It's really what is the right fit for this ecology, for this spot on the planet, for these people who reside here together. And I want to make sure not leave the nomads out who don't actually live in a single place, that maybe live all over the planet, that they too have a role to play in these conversations. That being said, a lot of these kind of planetary communication technologies, the ability to have a care and concern for the global commons and for humanity, and yet at the same time not have a single vision of what that might look like anywhere you go. And that's a tightrope. That's a balancing act, and one that humanity has not been very good at, and one that we believe, and Boldly Now is a big stand for this in education and programs to help us to learn to be very, very good stewards of both the planetary and the hyperlocal.
Absolutely. And I just want to touch on one of the things that you said about sovereignty and saying, no, thanks, we don't need your help. However, we would be happy to engage with you in an exploratory conversation of what working together could look like. Right? Because we're here in the process and we're in the magic of building bridges. Because I know that what's coming up next, we are going to need all hands on deck. And this conversation that we're having this week quite possibly could open us up to the possibility that more help that we may have not always believed in could be on its way if we allowed it to come through us, not some spaceship that's going to land on the White House or something like that, but allow universal intelligence to actually come through us in a new way that allows us to get to the places that you just spoke to.
Do you mind if I geek out a little bit?
I'm going to wax. 100%. No, go leave this in. We're not cutting.
I would just I think of the work done by Gene Roddenberry and Star Trek, and we just spoke about anti-colonialism, and the prime directive of the Next Generation Star Trek series was clear to not interfere in cultures, right? To observe and to exchange, but not to interfere. So a non-interference policy, and we wish we had had that during the age of colonialization for sure. We would have had so many treasures held for future generations on this planet. But if I think about, so I've been a science fiction and a space fanatic since I was very, very young. And in fact, my obsession with future generative futurism really comes from the same place. When I think about it, I've always wanted to meet alien intelligences and have that kind of level of exchange, and really, maybe up until this point in my life, if I could go explore the universe, I'd certainly want to do that. And I think there's something really important about that, in the sense that we have been the aliens on this planet in many cases. Especially the white culture who spread across the planet. We were the aliens. And so I think a lot of our tropes of fears about extraterrestrial life come from that. And certainly we have something to learn about ourselves in contemplating intelligent life off the planet that may be as important as actually discovering intelligent life off the planet. And that is that we not only exist in an earthbound ecology, we actually exist in a universal bound ecology, at least in our known universe, the universe that we can see in our inside of our light cone. of the universe that we know led back to some kind of singularity. There's something to say for the amazing emergence of consciousness, of self-awareness here on this planet, and something of deep and profound reverence for the improbable conditions that led to us to be able to have this conversation today. So, I've just gone from Star Trek to, cosmic consciousness or collective consciousness in one bound. But I really think the kind of reverence for life and all life may be one of the most important human values that we can grow and maintain, and especially hand down to future generations.
Absolutely. I'm hearing the words of a dear friend, where she said that we are ready to have close encounters of our own kind, with our own kind. And I'm curious, how many of us have actually had that experience, to have a close encounter with our own kind? And for us to even assume that we would be ready to accept the wisdom and love and care from any outside source other than that which was in this biosphere at this very moment would be an absurd idea if we weren't willing to look past simple things that keep us differentiating ourselves from each other. Right? You look at adding 3 new codes of a DNA strand or something like that, or shiny skin, and then there'd be mass mayhem. And there was a conversation that I remember of not stepping into these types of conversations with fear. Because if you could imagine, you're a parent and you come down the stairs and your child sees you and screams bloody murder, and they're terrified, and you're their parent, you have so much love for them, but every time you took a step closer, the child would scream in terror and fear. You would slowly back up the stairs because you love that child so much, and you would not come back down from the stairs because you did not want to terrify your child until they were ready to see you as for who you really were. And I really feel that we might be in an experience like that, where we have to be ready enough to experience first encounters of our own kind, as well as first encounters of anything else that could be possible.
Well, and kind of connecting back to our earlier conversation, we're not really ready to receive the wisdom of our own elders on the planet, much less intelligence from off the planet. And so I think certainly the biggest step that we could say towards being prepared for an encounter like that would be, wow, we have to be willing to be able to be in dialogue with people we don't agree with people that have a different worldview. Talk about a different worldview, try a different biology. And you might even begin to consider, we play around with time an awful lot at the Generative Futures Initiative. And what if an alien or an extraterrestrial intelligence experienced hundreds of years like we experienced minutes? We would be literally moving too fast to even be able to speak with them. And that wouldn't be a problem of lack of wanting to communicate. It's just our time frames may not match up. Our way that we experience time might not match up. And there's some great kind of very far out cosmological conversations around time, and the way we experience time may be a very, very localized phenomena. And so, I think is when we start looking into the future, we obviously are exploring things like humans in space, but it gets very, very, very interesting very quickly when you begin to imagine that the way that we experience space and time may actually be unique to human existence. And if it is unique to human existence, it may not translate to any other kind of intelligent life type existences. That's not good nor bad. It's just that to broaden the scope of the dialogue of what we might consider our place to be in the universe. A very unique one, and a very beautiful one, and one right now that needs to be getting into action to get its own house in order.
Absolutely. And the sooner that we can identify, a friend of ours today was saying, we the planet. If we can identify as we the planet, then maybe we could be we the universe. And maybe when differentiating viewpoints or conversations came up, we allowed ourselves the interplanetary dimension experience of being an honored guest into another person's worldview and begin to transcend and traverse worlds and universes right where we are, and allow the intelligence of each one of those worlds and each one of those universes to fully integrate into ourselves, and then come to an intelligent synthesis of the combined information that creates a new thought for the world, which is actually what's needed right now.
New thinking, new world, new future.
New you.
Yeah, a new reality. So I think that's about it for our time right now. I'm Michael Sean Conaway.
And I'm Rachel Morrison.
And you have been watching the Boldly Now show. Thank you for being with us, and we'll see you soon again.
The Boldly Now show, igniting the world of burning desire, big ideas, and bold action. Be sure to download Boldly You in the App Store, Google Play, or online at bold.ly/YOU. Boldly You is an app and learning platform igniting your burning desire, big ideas, and bold action, generating a future for a thriving humanity.
Hey, this is Michael Sean Conaway with Boldly Now. I am really excited to have Prince Ye with me, international YouTube star, spoken word artist, and really, really great guy. Richard, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Michael Sean. Really good to be here, man. Thanks for inviting me. I'm excited to have this conversation with you.
Yeah, and we've got a couple of conversations that we want to have today. First, I want to just really quickly check in with you. How are you doing? How's your family doing? How's St. Louis doing? Things okay in the world? And if not, what do you see out there?
Thank you for asking, man. My personal life is well. I can't complain. Family's healthy. Talk to my mom every day, my pops every day. Everybody's good. My brother, he's in law enforcement. He's in Cleveland, so he's kind of still on the streets, and he's got his essential job to do. But he's good. Him and his daughter are good. So the immediate family as well. My global family, I know a lot of people are suffering. The economy has collapsed in many ways. A lot of people have lost their livelihoods. But I always try to see opportunity in these problems. And I think there is a lot of opportunity for growth, for evolution, for change, for stillness, for taking this time of social distancing and going inward. So I think it's a great opportunity for people, and we're going to see a lot come out of this.
It seems like there's opportunity here, and I think we feel it. I mean, like, our hearts are broken in some ways, and our society and civilization's broken. But you might argue that it was broken before the pandemic. It's just the pandemic really demonstrated to us the brokenness of it. But there's also this hopeful, and maybe not even hopeful, there's this kind of passion that seems to be ignited in people about doing something or giving something or contributing to something or making things better in some way. And that seems like that's a great gift. I mean, I think that's the greatest thing that we could come out with, is more of a capacity to give and love.
That's why we're here. That's why we've always been here. I know you interviewed Bruce Lipton. As a species, we didn't survive because of competition. It was collaboration. It was us coming together in harmony, working together as one, that allowed us to be this species that we are today. And now we have to make the next step. You know, we've had social conditioning kind of take us into this individualized mode of reality. And now we have to evolve into a collective field of reality.
Yeah, great. And I think that's a great segue to introduce our audience just a little bit to this project that you and I worked on, that hasn't actually been released to the world. In fact, we're going to be releasing it. Actually, you may be watching it for the first time in the world right now. And it's a project that, it came out of dialogue between you and Bruce and other people talking about this idea of it being an imaginal cell, these cells in the in-between state between the caterpillar and the butterfly. I don't want to give away too much of the video, so I'll pause here, and then we'll play the video for everybody, and then you and I can come back and talk about what it means to interact and orchestrate as one. Okay, here we go. Here's the video.
Everybody says that this world can't go on as it has been going on. They say our systems are failing us, the economy, healthcare, government, and that we are ruining the planet around us one tree at a time. They say we're not safe to walk around our town and our schools, on our streets. And when I look around, it seems true. Unless it isn't. You see, a caterpillar spends its whole life in a frenetic drive to consume as many leaves as it can, never stopping. But then one day the caterpillar does stop. On the inside, all of its systems start to fail, and slowly the cocoon hardens, the caterpillar disintegrates into an amino acid soup, and that caterpillar is no more. In that moment, cells that had been dormant in the caterpillar begin to rise up. At first as independent single-cell organisms, then they come together clustering in a community, and they imagine their way out of the wreckage of the caterpillar, and they build a butterfly. Yeah, you can see where this is going. But let's stop for a moment and ask ourselves, what would become of the caterpillar if those independent imaginal cells never came together? That's right, no butterfly. So if our systems are failing us and disintegrating to the ground, who are the imaginal cells amongst us, those brightly burning independent people? From where I stand, it's you. And you and you and you and us, every one of us. And all we have to do is come together, bring our brilliance together, not to get something or push some agenda, but to come together as one. I believe that this is the time for us to rise together, to embrace one another and make the leap from me to we. Yeah, I like the sound of that. We together. We rise up. We rise up for love. We rise up for each other. We rise up so that no one is left behind. We rise up for the future of our planet. We rise up for equality, for justice in our streets, for men and women, young and old, no matter what shape, size, color, or race. We rise up for you and for me and for us together. We rise up together because if we stay separated, isolated, then our brilliant lights will fade and no butterfly will emerge from the cocoon. So how will your voice contribute to the song of the universe? Universe, our one song. This is our time to come together and bravely step into the future where we rise up, lift off, and soar.